There we go. All right. That should be up in a minute. All right. So um, I have been going geographically around the world talking about Operation Gladio and some of because this is a three-dimensional process, obviously. We've got the globe process of how these Operation Gladios fit within hemispheres. So we talked about South America, we talked about Central America, and because most of these events spilled over into the surrounding countries because the CIA set up the bases to attack a particular country in the surrounding countries. So you can't look at them in isolation as just one country. We had to do it regionally for it to make more sense. But also, there is a linear, a time element to all of this as well. And since we did Libya, I wanted to point out kind of the time element. And I have had people recently talk to me about um, the particular presidents that have been involved in Operation Gladio. And of course, we all grew up with a preconceived idea of Reagan being a great president. And so when I started the African continent, there was a lot of activity during Reagan's administration. And so I went over to begin looking. We talked about Angola and we talked about South Africa and the Congo. And we also have Zaire, which is actually the Congo. So just a little bit of history. The Congo, when they murdered, assassinated Lumumba and installed the fascist dictator there, they broke out during that period Katanga and recognized it as its own country. Well, once Lumumba was gone, they didn't need Katanga as a separate country anymore. So they faked us all out by naming the Congo Zaire. And so Zaire went back to the original Congo footprint, including Katanga. And so they were kind of made whole, if you will. And then that fascist dictator maintained control over Zaire. And eventually Zaire changes its name back to the Congo. So I was looking at covering Zaire today, and I got to looking at the time frame that all of that was happening, and I'm like, oh, well, we got a whole bunch of other related things like Morocco in the early 80s under Reagan administration. And so I thought that I would go back and do kind of an overview, if you will. I just want to quickly point out a timeline for you, because I do think that puts things in context for people who think that Reagan was not involved in Operation Gladio, and that he was on the up and up, because he was not. It kind of starts with Zaire. There was some still spillover into Angola as well. And Angola started in 75 and went into basically all of the 80s. And Reagan didn't stop it. He only accelerated it and perpetuated it. And if you remember, Angola was about the like MLPA, which were the good guys, the guys that were educated in how to run countries, and everybody that was neutral all supported them. But the West had decided they wanted a corrupt leader, and that guy was related to the fascists that they installed in the Congo / Zaire, and like his brother-in-law. And he was in charge of a faction called UNITA, UNITA. And so the US, both Carter and Reagan, supplied arms through France, Israel, South Africa into Angola. And that's important to understand that, because although it had started prior to Reagan's administration, he continued it and even increased it. And then you'll have Zaire, which we will go over. And then it runs into Jamaica. And we talked about Jamaica. Jamaica was where I did a thread on that. It was I don't know if we actually did a show on it, but basically it had a leader, and the CIA did not want that leader to be in charge, and they sent teams in. They did surveys as a way of identifying people who would rise up against the people from the State Department, the National Endowment for Democracy, the OAS, the Organization of Americas, all of those people. They just descended on Jamaica and decided they were going to overthrow the government. And Seychelles, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, happened just as Reagan is coming into office. Then you have Grenada, which lasted from 1979 to 84, which was another CIA coup. And Grenada was used as an excuse, because remember, we had a few Cubans actually in Grenada, but they were teachers. And the CIA spun that as, oh my God, the Cubans are infiltrating Grenada and going to take it away. Quick, let's get some Marines down there and kill everybody and overthrow the government. And I'm not kidding. That's just basically what happened. So there was another country that was watching all of that go on and was like, what the hell is going on? That country was called Suriname. And that is the old, so just for you guys, again, another history lesson, Guyana, which we talked about extensively with when we talked about Jim Jones, is the part of the, so Guyana was a huge, big country, and it was divided up into three during the decolonialization. There is Guyana proper, which is next to Venezuela. There is British Guyana. And then there was Dutch Guyana, which changed its name to Suriname. And I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's Surimame. That guy, and we'll talk about him, but he was petrified because he even went so far as to kick all the Cubans that were helping him in the education and medical arena out of his country, because he was petrified that the U.S. was going to do to him what they did to the guy over in Grenada. And that's why the CIA does what they do. And then again, of course, we've spent the last couple of days talking about Libya. We rolled right out of those two, the Morocco and Suriname, into Libya. And then Nicaragua, Panama, Bulgaria. And Bulgaria started towards the end of Reagan's administration, but most of it happened during the Bush senior administration. So, and then of course we have El Salvador was going on during that time. Afghanistan was going on during that time, the Mujahideen version of it. So I just wanted to kind of picture this for you in a completely different plane, being time wise as well, because that's oftentimes very important to put the things into context. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Seychelles. And for those of you who don't know, the Seychelles is in the Indian / Pacific, way down there area. We use that, and I first got acquainted with the Seychelles when I was at my first officer duty station in Los Angeles Air Force Base, because Los Angeles Air Force Base is where they buy, and it used to be where they managed all of the space programs for the Air Force. And Seychelles has been a space tracking station for a very long time, and it was part of our area of responsibility. And so the officers that were assigned there, when I did officer assignments, I did all of their personnel support for the Seychelles out of Los Angeles. I did turn down an opportunity to go there when we were changing our officer promotion systems. I kicked myself in the butt for doing it, but I was a single parent, didn't have a choice, because it's absolutely beautiful. And now, given this, I wish I'd have been there, because I would have been there right after this happened, because I got stationed there in 1987. So we're going to start with the Seychelles, and we're going to start with a guy by the name of Michael Hoare, Hoare. In 1981, he was already a very old man. By very old man, I mean my age, but very old man for being a mercenary. Because I don't think I would want to be a mercenary at this point in my life. He was also professionally an accountant, and he lived in a place called Durban, South Africa. And like I said, his call sign in the mercenary world was called Mad Mike. And he had been in multiple CIA operations around the world, including the Congo when we were killing Lumumba. And he was in Angola when we were using South Africa as a proxy. So he's very well acquainted with these. I almost said change of command operations, but assassination operations, coups, whatever you want to call it. But it's definitely a change of command operation as well. So the Seychelles is made up of a whole bunch of different islands. It's 800 miles off the coast of Kenya. And it has a population of about 62,000 people. It used to be, a long time ago, a British colony. And it has the Air Force station there. And in 1977, there was a guy by the name of France Albert Rene who, in a coup, took over the government. And he happened to tell South Africa that they weren't allowed to land there anymore. And because he was not impressed with the government of South Africa, because at the time it was still an apartheid government. So he did what other people did, but you're going to see how it turns out for him. Or what I should say, what other people said they were doing, but they weren't really doing that. They were just using proxies. He really meant it. So the U.S. had to use all of its formidable powers and economic and political persuasion just to be able to retain its base there for a satellite tracking station, because he wanted us gone too. Our lease was not up for about another 10 years in 1990. And Washington kept reiterating how, the world was going to fall apart, as they do with every one of these things, that if we don't have that one satellite station, tracking station, that our entire national security was going to collapse. But what they were really worried about is him having any relationship at all with the Soviet Union, because he made it clear that he was going to be a non-aligned entity, and that he was not going to favor any one nation over another. And we already know from our being months into this program that that's not allowed. You're not allowed to be independent. You 100% have to be on the US's team or the West team. And you're not allowed to actually be independent. Now, you can say you are, like Sweden did and Switzerland did, but we all know they weren't really neutral. You're just allowed to say it, not be it. Okay. He was also a very strong advocate for a nuclear-free Indian Ocean. He did not want any foreign military bases in the Indian Ocean, and he didn't want to be the guinea pigs with nuclear fallout coming all over the islands. I'm shocked that he would care about his people, which obviously was a huge big deal because of our use of Diego Garcia. And while the Seychelles may have just been a little island, the real problem with this guy standing up to the big giant was other people might get the idea that you could actually do that. So this ant had to be squashed at all costs. And in 1979, sure enough, the CIA began hatching a plot to not just coup the government, but they're going to do an overall invasion of the Seychelles, and they're going to overthrow his government. Unfortunately for them, like so many, like Mossadegh in Iran, they got caught. And Rene was able to abort it once he discovered what they were trying to do. And it happened to be before the mercenaries ever even took off from South Africa. An official investigation into the matter by the Seychelles government concluded that the US and France had been directly involved with the plotters. The American ambassador in Kenya had been in contact with supporters of James Mancham, Mancham, the man that had been deposed by Rene. So this is the guy that's kind of like the U.S. stooge that let them set up all of the operations there on the Seychelles, and the locals were not impressed with him. So they supported Rene and the overthrow of this guy who was basically a sellout to the West. And so he went to Kenya and is hatching plans with the CIA and South Africa and France to get his old job back for him. So the U.S. Liaison, they don't really have a full-fledged ambassador there, so the charge d'affaires in the Seychelles was the link man in the conspiracy. So 120 Americans that were employed at the consulate there and at the U.S. base that were proven to be in cohorts with this entire coup got kicked out of the Seychelles. 2 years later, in 1981, an invasion force of more than 40 men pretending to be members of a rugby team traveled from South Africa to Swaliland. Hence, they flew to the Seychelles aboard a regular commercial flight. It appeared that the attack was not planned for the actual arrival, but that they were going to like check into their hotel, get their shit together, and then do it. Unfortunately for them, the arms that they were trying to smuggle in through the airport were discovered at the airport. So they basically, these people that had come in to basically coup the government, was forced to board a aircraft on the tarmac, hijack it, it happened to be an Air India aircraft, and go back to Durban, which is where they had launched from. And 7 of their members weren't lucky enough to make it out, and they actually got arrested on site. But their leader, Mad Mike, did manage to get on the aircraft. A few days after this happened, the Sunday Tribune, published in Durban,